We've been looking closely at Neil Shank's work, God, the Devil, and Darwin.
Yeah.
A really powerful critique. Richard Dawkins wrote the foreword, too.
Yes, and that source is key because it doesn't just wave away modern creationism. It takes it apart very systematically, piece by scientific piece.
So our focus is intelligent design, ID. And we need this deep dive because, well, ID proponents have consciously moved away from what the source calls the innocent charm of old-style revival tent creationism.
It's definitely more sophisticated now.
Exactly. It's still creationism, fundamentally, but it's dressed up, designed to sound, intellectually credible to a secular audience.
And that sophistication, it really hangs on two main ideas, two sort of modern twists on the very old watchmaker argument.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is irreducible complexity, IC. This is the claim that certain biochemical systems, maybe cellular structures, they're so tightly integrated that if you were to remove just one single component, the whole system would basically collapse. It wouldn't function at all.
Which, if you really break it down, it sounds a lot like Darwin's old challenge, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That question, what is the use of half an eye?
Precisely.
But now they're applying it to things like the bacterial flagellum or blood clotting.
Yeah.
Stuff happening at the molecular level.
They've definitely shifted the ground, moved it from, biology you can see to biochemistry that's harder to observe directly.
Okay, so that's irreducible complexity. What's the second cloak, as you called it?
The second one is specified complexity, or SC. This tries to deal with the problem that, well, just being complex isn't necessarily a sign of design.
Right. Like a random jumble of letters is complex, but meaningless.
Exactly. Any huge random pattern is complex, but it's not specified. So SE adds this requirement for complexity to indicate intelligence. It also has to match some kind of independent pattern, a specification.
Okay. So the distinction is crucial then. A big pile of junk is complex. But a computer chip is complex and specified. It does something specific according to a pattern.
That's the idea. ID theorists argue that if you find something that's both highly unlikely to happen by chance and fits a recognizable pattern of function or meaning, well, it must be the work of a mind.
Okay, so our mission today is what exactly?
Well, we want to trace this design argument back through history, see where it came from, then show how Darwin's mechanism offered a really powerful scientific alternative.
And then dissect the modern ID claims, IC and SC, using specific examples from the source material.
Right. Biological examples, physical ones, too. And importantly, we also need to look at the underlying socio-political agenda driving the ID movement, what they actually call the wedge.
The wedge strategy. Yeah, the sources are quite clear that the stakes here are, well, they're much bigger than just a debate about school science lessons.
Oh, definitely. The source materials really emphasize this. The immediate goal, the thin end of the wedge, might seem like just getting supernatural science into schools.
But the ultimate aim, the fat end,
is a direct challenge to the whole foundation of the modern secular state. The source warns the goal is essentially to replace Enlightenment values, democracy, tolerance, with a much narrower, restrictive Christian morality favored by the ID leaders.
Wow.
With the end goal, potentially, being a fundamentalist Christian theocracy. It frames this whole debate less as science and more as an ideological battle, using science as its main weapon.
Okay, so to really understand the critiques of ID, we need to appreciate just how deep the roots of this design argument go. It's not new. It takes us way back, doesn't it? Back to fundamental questions about purpose and nature. Teleology.
Absolutely. You have to start with Aristotle. He's the one who really formalized this idea that everything in nature has a natural end or function, a purpose determined by its essential form. Functionalism.
Like the classic example. An acorn's purpose is to become an oak tree. An eye's purpose is to see.
Exactly. And for Aristotle, understanding something natural meant understanding its ultimate goal. It's telos.
And this idea of inherent purpose, it naturally led people to think about a craftsman.
Yeah.
Right? Someone ordering the universe.
It did. It led to the idea of the demiurge, which literally means public worker or craftsman.
Okay.
But here's a really crucial distinction that often gets lost. The ancient demiurge wasn't imagined as creating everything from nothing ex nihilo.
Right.
No, the demiurge was seen as a shaper, someone imposing order on pre-existing material, pre-existing chaos, not the all-powerful creator figure we associate with later monotheism. This focus on shaping existing stuff is important for how the argument developed.
So, by the Roman period, this thinking gets more formalized. Cicero, for instance, he splits the design argument into two distinct strands.
That's right, and they're strands we still recognize very clearly today. the cosmological and the biological.
Okay, so the cosmological one is about the stars.
Pretty much. The heavens. The regular, purposeful movements of the sun, the moon, the planets. Why purposeful? Because they allowed humans to track time, to determine seasons. That very regularity seemed to imply design, engineering.
And the biological argument, more down to earth.
Much more so, focused on the earth itself, its abundance. Cicero used this really powerful analogy. People store grain for their families, right? Not for mice or ants. Therefore, logically, the earth's bounty, the grain, the vegetables, all of it must have been provided for the sake of humans. It wasn't just about function, but about intentional provision, benefit.
Okay, so this tradition of seeing nature as ordered, purposeful, and specifically for human benefit, it really picks up steam during the Enlightenment.
Enormous momentum, especially in the 17th century. You had huge leaps in anatomy, physiology. Think about Vesalius correcting centuries-old anatomical errors.
Like the number of ribs in men and women.
Exactly. Confirming they have the same number, despite what tradition said, and then William Harvey figuring out the mechanics of blood circulation.
Right, and this leads to that powerful metaphor, the body as a machine.
It really took hold. If the body is this intricate machine, the heart a pump, the skeleton a frame, then surely nature itself must be a grand machine, made by a supreme engineer.
And this brings us towards Newton.
Isaac Newton, yes.
Yeah.
In many ways, he's an intellectual forerunner to modern ID proponents. He saw evidence of intelligent design absolutely everywhere, in the heavens.
The planets moving so regularly despite comets messing things up.
Right. And also in the biological world, he noted the elegant similarities between species, two eyes, two arms, this recurring morphology.
But the source material adds a really interesting point about Newton. He believed in a designer, but he wasn't a biblical literalist.
Not at all. That's crucial context. He saw the Genesis creation story as language artificially adapted to the sense of the vulgar, necessary simplification for ordinary people.
So he accepted a creator, but not necessarily the literal text as science.
Exactly. He didn't treat scripture as a precise scientific account. And this actually mirrors how modern ID proponents distance themselves from young earth creationism. They accept an old earth, some parts of science, but insist on intervention. They're building on thinkers like Newton, but, selectively.
Okay, and then we get the absolute classic statement of the design argument. William Paley, 1802, the watchmaker.
Paley's argument. It's so simple on the surface, but incredibly powerful rhetorically. You find a watch on the ground, complex mechanism. You instantly infer a watchmaker, someone who designed it for a purpose telling time.
And he just applies that logic straight to nature, especially the eye.
Yes. The complexity and the obvious function of the eye, for Paley, demanded an intelligent artificer, a designer.
But here's the really amazing part, the irony the source points out. Paley actually got incredibly close to Darwin's idea himself.
It's remarkable. His theological writings actually discussed variation and, differential reproductive success.
Yep.
He wrote about how millions of forms might have perished because of some defect of their constitution. He saw nature selecting against bad variation.
So he saw variation, he saw selection. Why didn't he make the leap to evolution? Why stick with design?
Yeah. Fundamentally, he lacked a mechanism for generating the well-adapted forms in the first place. He was still stuck in that machine metaphor. Organisms were like perfectly made pogs fitting into pre-designed niches. He looked around and saw distinct species, these regular classes, and he just couldn't imagine how random variation in this winnowing process could possibly organize life into such neat categories. He didn't have the concept of historical descent, common ancestry, or genetics. The idea of species self-organizing over time just didn't fit the picture.
Okay, so Paley throws down the gauntlet, scientifically speaking. And for about 50 years, the design argument really holds sway. Then, 1859, Darwin changes everything. A radical reappraisal.
It was absolutely monumental. Darwin's core achievement was providing a natural, unintelligent, unguided mechanism that could explain adaptive functional structures. He basically sidestepped the need for a designer entirely.
Shifting the focus.
Completely, moving away from final causes, the idea of purpose, and focusing instead on efficient causes, the actual mechanism.
But he couldn't have done that without the concept of deep time. Right? Geology played a huge role here.
Oh, absolutely essential. You have to credit Charles Lyell and the idea of uniformitarianism. This geological principle argued that the Earth's features weren't formed by sudden catastrophes, but by the same slow, gradual processes we see today.
Like erosion, sedimentation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this established that the Earth was incredibly old, millions, even billions of years old. That vast timescale was absolutely necessary for Darwin's theory to work. It gave evolution the time it needed for slow changes to accumulate.
So Darwin takes this idea of slow, gradual change, gradation, and applies it to life, emphasizing continuity, not catastrophe.
That's the phylogenetic view. Differences between species aren't absolute breaks created separately. They reflect gradual modifications as lineages diverge from common ancestors over immense time. It gives us that tree of life picture, the relationship between, say, humans and chimps. Shared ancestry, divergence.
And the engine driving this change, the unintelligent mechanism. That was natural selection, borrowed from Malthus, right?
Yes, derived from Thomas Malthus's observation about populations outstripping resources, leading to a struggle for existence. Darwin saw that in this struggle, any tiny variation that gave an individual an edge would tend to be preserved.
Survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest, as Herbert Spencer later termed it. Natural selection is just the preservation of these favorable differences and the elimination of harmful ones. And crucially, it's a blind, uncaring, unintelligent market mechanism.
Like Adam Smith's invisible hand in economics.
That's a great analogy used in the source. Individuals just pursue their own interests, survival, reproduction, and the unintended result is adaptation for the population as a whole. No guiding intelligence needed for the market, none needed for biology either.
So if adaptation is just the outcome of this blind process, then the design Paley saw, it's an illusion.
It's an illusion created by the relentless pressure of selection over eons. And this realization, it completely shatters that old body-as-machine metaphor.
How so?
Well, if you have an intelligent designer, you expect perfection, right? Elegance, efficiency, like a well-made machine. But the biological world, it's full of inefficiency, waste, kludges, compromises. It's the absolute opposite of clean engineering.
And those imperfections, that bad design, actually becomes evidence for evolution.
Exactly. Think about lower back pain in humans, wisdom teeth, the weird wiring of the vertebrate eye. An evolutionary biologist sees these things not as design flaws, but as evidence of historical constraints. We're stuck with anatomical baggage from our ancestors.
Making do.
Making do. Getting good enough solutions, not optimal ones. This points directly to a messy, trial-and-error evolutionary process. These imperfections show that function arises from efficient causes, the historical push and pull of selection, not some final cause or preordained purpose.
Okay, so Darwin provided a powerful refutation. But the modern ID movement, they kind of retreated to a place Darwin couldn't easily reach back then, the molecular level. That's where Michael Behe brings in irreducible complexity, I see.
Right. Behe's argument is basically that some biochemical systems are just too complex, too interdependent to have evolved step by step. You need all the parts there at once for it to work at all.
So how could gradual evolution build it?
That's the challenge he poses. And his go-to illustration is the mousetrap.
Ah, yes, the mousetrap analogy. Could you walk us through that, the 5 parts?
Sure. He identifies 5 core parts. The base platform, the hammer that snaps down, the spring providing power, the little catch that holds the hammer back, and the holding bar that the bait connects to. And his point is, take away any single one of those 5 parts, and the trap doesn't just work poorly, it doesn't work at all. It can't catch a mouse. Not even, as he says, half a mouse.
So the conclusion is, it must have been assembled all at once, intelligently designed.
That's the inference he draws. And he applies that same logic to things like the bacterial flagellum, that little molecular motor.
It's a powerful analogy. You can see why it catches on. But the source material we looked at argues it's actually a really poor model for biology. Why?
Well, there are several key problems. First, it's comparing a human artifact with a natural process. We know mousetraps are designed. We have the blueprints, the patents, thousands of them since the 1800s, showing even mousetraps evolve through trial and error. But living systems don't come with blueprints or known designers, so the analogy starts on shaky ground.
And the second problem relates to how biological systems are actually built, right? They aren't minimalist like a mousetrap.
Exactly. The mousetrap is designed for maximum specificity with minimum parts. Very little redundancy. Biological systems are often the opposite. They are full of redundant complexity and often have low specificity. Parts can do multiple jobs.
Redundancy, so they're more robust.
Much more robust. They can often handle parts failing or being removed, which is completely unlike the mousetrap.
Can you give a biological example that shows this difference, this redundancy in action?
Sure, a great example from the source is the glycolysis pathway. This is the fundamental process cells use to get energy from glucose. It's a long chain of chemical reactions.
Okay.
Now, consider just the very first step, adding a phosphate group to glucose. In our tissues, this isn't done by just one single specific enzyme. There are multiple versions of the enzyme that can do this job. They're called isozymes.
Isozyme. So if one gets knocked out by a mutation?
The pathway often keeps working, maybe a bit less efficiently, but the other isozymes can pick up the slack. The whole system doesn't collapse like the mousetrap. Plus, the pathway can often use slightly different sugar types, too. It's flexible, adaptable.
Flexible, robust, adaptable. Components can be repurposed. It's built in a way that allows for gradual evolution, unlike the mousetrap analogy suggests. IC really misunderstands this fundamental aspect of living systems.
Okay, so IC takes a hit because biology is messy and redundant. But ID proponents have another line of argument. Specified complexity, SC.
Right. SC tries to be more rigorous, more mathematical. It says you need three things to detect design. High complexity, meaning it's improbable, low chance of occurring randomly. Contingency, meaning it wasn't forced to happen by natural law. And specification, it matches an independent pattern.
And if you have all three and you rule out a designer, ID says the only alternative left is impossible chance.
That's their setup. But the major scientific alternative they tend to ignore or downplay is self-organization.
Self-organization, natural processes creating order.
Exactly. It's a natural source of complex, ordered patterns that doesn't require any design input. It happens when energy flows through a system, activating its internal dynamics. It's just thermodynamics, really. And there's a classic experiment that demonstrates this. The Bernard cells.
The Bernard convection cells, yes. It's a fantastic counterexample from the source. You take a thin layer of fluid, say water or oil, and heat it gently and uniformly from below.
Okay.
As the heat flows through, nothing much happens at first. But when the temperature difference between the bottom and top reaches a certain critical point, the fluid spontaneously organizes itself.
Into what?
Into these incredibly intricate, regular patterns of hexagonal cells, sometimes pentagonal. You can see them because of how they refract light. It's highly complex, ordered movement.
Wow. So that pattern is complex, definitely. And it's contingent. It didn't have to form exactly like that.
Correct. And crucially, the pattern, the hexagonal shape, is specified, but it's specified by the laws of physics, hydrodynamics, acting on the fluid under those specific energy flow conditions.
So no designer needed. The complexity and specification just emerge naturally from the system's properties and the energy flow.
Precisely. It demonstrates that complex, specified, contingent order can arise without any intelligence guiding it.
Which implies that lots of things in nature might just look designed.
That's the key point the source makes. Think about an ant colony building a complex nest, or even just an apple tree developing its structure. These are self-organizing systems. They generate sophisticated, problem-solving behaviors and structures from, relatively dumb components interacting locally.
Giving the appearance of intelligence.
A very strong appearance of intelligence and purpose where none actually exists in the process itself. This really undermines SC's claim to be a reliable filter for detecting actual design.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit towards physics, because beyond the biology, a really common argument you hear against evolution involves the second law of thermodynamics, the entropy law.
Ah, yes, the old chestnut. How can complex life, which is ordered, arise from disorder if the universe as a whole must always become more disordered?
That's the argument, often associated with people like Henry Morris. Evolution seems to go uphill against entropy.
Right, and it's based on a complete misunderstanding or misapplication of the second law. The law only states that entropy, or disorder, must increase overall in an isolated system.
A closed box, basically.
Yeah.
No energy or matter in or out.
Exactly. But living organisms are anything but isolating systems.
We eat, we breathe, we radiate heat.
We are fundamentally open dissipative systems. We constantly exchange energy and matter with our environment. We need that flow to maintain ourselves.
So the second law doesn't really apply in the same way.
It applies to the whole system, including the environment, but not necessarily meaning order can't increase locally. Think about the hurricane example the source uses.
Okay.
A hurricane is a huge, highly ordered structure, right? A
Yeah.
swirling vortex. That's a local decrease in entropy, a pocket of order.
But it needs energy.
It needs a massive energy flow. It draws heat from the warm ocean surface, the source, and dissipates it into the cold upper atmosphere, the sink.
And that overall process increases disorder.
Massively. The localized order of the hurricane's structure is only possible because it facilitates a much greater increase in disorder, entropy, in the surrounding environment as that heat energy dissipates chaotically. So the second law is perfectly happy overall.
And life works the same way, using energy flow to create local order.
Essentially, yes. Life takes in high-grade energy, like sunlight or chemical energy, uses it to build and maintain its complex structures, and releases low-grade energy, like waste heat, back into the environment. The local order of life is paid for by a larger increase in the universe's overall entropy.
And there's a bigger cosmic picture here, too, related to the expanding universe.
Yes, that's another crucial point. The argument sometimes assumes the universe is like a fixed box, but it's not. It's expanding.
How does that affect entropy?
Well, the early universe was actually in a state of near maximum entropy, basically a hot uniform soup. But as the universe expands, the maximum possible entropy it could hold keeps increasing. This creates room, thermodynamically speaking, for pockets of order like galaxies, stars, and eventually life to form spontaneously as the universe cools and energy gradients appear. Complex structures are natural consequences of an expanding, cooling universe dissipating energy.
Okay, that deals with the physics objection. Let's swing back to biology. We talked about natural selection happening between generations, but the source mentions something really interesting: Darwinian processes happening within an organism's life. Ontogenetic Darwinism.
Yes, this is a fascinating area. It shows that adaptation isn't just something that happens over long evolutionary timescales. Our own bodies use Darwinian-like mechanisms of variation and selection to adapt during our lifetime.
And the prime example is the immune system.
The adaptive immune system, particularly the antibody response, is a perfect example. Think about it. When you're born, your body doesn't somehow magically know every possible virus or bacteria you might encounter.
Right. There are millions of potential threats. You can't have a pre-programmed antibody for every single one.
Exactly. So how does the body generate maybe 10 to 100 million different antibody shapes to be ready? It uses a process that looks remarkably like evolution.
How does it work? Where does the variation come from?
Okay, so you inherit your antibody genes in a basic template form, but inside your immune cells, your B cells, there's a process called somatic recombination. It's like the cell takes different segments of these antibody genes and randomly shuffles them, cuts and pastes them together in countless combinations.
Creating huge diversity just by chance.
Huge diversity. That's the variation step. Millions of different potential antibody shapes are generated randomly before you even encounter an infection.
Okay, so the variation is there. Then what happens when, say, a virus particle enters the body?
Then comes selection. Only the B cells, whose randomly generated antibodies happen to fit and bind to that specific virus particle, get activated. All the others are ignored.
So the fittest antibody, the one that matches, is selected.
It's selected. And then comes amplification. That selected B cell gets stimulated to divide rapidly, making lots of copies of itself clones. This ramps up the production of that specific effective antibody.
But it gets even more refined than that, doesn't it? Something about hypermutation.
Yes, this is amazing. As those selected B cells are cloning themselves, the antibody genes undergo another process called somatic hypermutation. This introduces tiny random mutations typos, essentially into the antibody gene copies.
Why do that?
It creates slightly different versions of the already successful antibody. Some of these new versions might bind to the virus even better. Selection then acts again, favoring the cells producing the very best-fitting antibodies. So the immune response actually gets fine-tuned and improved over the course of an infection.
Wow, so it's literally evolution happening inside us. Random variation, selection, amplification, further variation, further selection.
Precisely. It's adaptation through an internal Darwinian process, not some pre-programmed perfection. It highlights how powerful these unintelligent mechanisms can be.
And this idea of gradual improvement through selection, step by step, that also tackles the classic ID example of the eye, doesn't it?
Completely. The eye is often held up as the pinnacle of irreducible complexity. How could it evolve gradually? But evolutionary biology maps out a very clear, continuous pathway.
Starting simple.
Starting very simple, just light-sensitive spots on an organism. Even that gives a huge advantage knowing light from dark.
Then you can get structures like the ones in limpets, patella.
Right, the limpet patella has a simple pit eye, just a depression lined with those light-sensitive cells. But because it's a pit, it gives basic directional information. Light coming from one side casts a shadow on the other.
Better than just on-off.
Much better. Allows the limpet to sense movement, find shade. From there, any small improvement, the pit getting deeper, maybe closing over slightly to form a pinhole, the fluid inside starting to act as a primitive lens offers a selective advantage.
And the key principle is?
As the source quotes, even the slightest degree of focusing is better than none at all. Once you have some structure, any tiny modification that improves its function, even slightly, will be favored by selection. It's a gradual ramp of improvement, not an impossible leap.
Okay, so the ID argument faces challenges in biology, in physics, but it doesn't stop there. It goes cosmic. The argument from anthropic coincidences or fine-tuning.
Yes, this is the osmological version of the design argument. It points out that the fundamental constants of nature, things like the strength of gravity, the charge on an electron, the mass ratio of protons and electrons, seem incredibly precisely set.
Finely tuned.
Finely tuned, exactly. If these constants were just slightly different, the argument goes, the universe would be radically different. Maybe it would have collapsed instantly, maybe stars couldn't form, maybe carbon atoms, the basis of life as we know it, couldn't exist.
So ID proponents look at this apparent fine-tuning and say...
They say it's a form of complex, specified information on a cosmic scale. The universe's parameters match the specification required for life. Therefore, it must be evidence of a designer who deliberately set those initial conditions. This is often called the strong anthropic principle, or SAP.
But science looks for natural explanations first.
Yeah.
What's the main naturalistic alternative here?
Well, the leading scientific counter-hypothesis is the multiverse, often referred to as option C in these discussions. The idea is that our universe might just be one among a vast number, maybe an infinite number of other universes.
A cosmic ensemble.
Exactly. And in this ensemble, all possible combinations of physical constants might exist in different universes. Naturally, we find ourselves living in one of the universes where the constants happen to be compatible with life, because we couldn't exist to observe it otherwise.
The source uses that great analogy of the clothes shop.
The off-the-rack clothes shop, yeah. If the shop has a huge stock of suits in every possible size, representing different universes with different constants, you shouldn't be surprised to eventually find one suit that fits you perfectly, our life-friendly universe. It's an observational selection effect, not evidence of a cosmic tailor.
Right. We can only observe a universe capable of producing observers.
It sounds a bit circular, but it's a powerful logical point against assuming design. And the source adds another analogy to counter our feeling of being lucky, the misanthropic roulette.
Misanthropic roulette, how does that work?
Imagine playing Russian roulette, but with a twist. 5 of the 6 chambers are loaded. You somehow survive 5 clicks of the trigger. You'd feel incredibly lucky, maybe even divinely protected, right?
Absolutely terrified, but yes, lucky.
But statistically, your specific survival sequence, click, 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 survive, was just as probable as any other specific sequence of 5 outcomes. We only attach significance to the survival sequence because we're here to experience it. Attributing your survival to providence, the source argues, is like a cosmological version of the gambler's fallacy. We mistake the necessity of our own existence for evidence of special design.
Okay. This really brings us to the philosophical core of the conflict, doesn't it?
Yeah.
ID's attack on naturalism.
Yes. ID proponents are very explicit about this. They argue that modern science is fundamentally flawed because it operates under what they call philosophical naturalism, the underlying assumption that nature is all there is. A closed system, self-contained, self-explanatory.
And they want science to be open to supernatural explanations.
They insist it must be. But this is where the scientific community draws a crucial distinction. Science generally operates under methodological naturalism, not necessarily philosophical naturalism.
What's the difference?
Methodological naturalism simply says that, as a method, science seeks to explain natural phenomena using natural causes and mechanisms, things we can test, observe, measure. It doesn't necessarily make the philosophical claim that nothing supernatural exists.
So it doesn't rule out the supernatural entirely.
Not in principle, but it demands evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And ID, critics argue, simply hasn't provided testable, verifiable evidence for a supernatural designer. Science follows the evidence where it leads. When evidence pointed towards oxidation instead of phlogiston for fire, science changed its mind based on evidence. Not because it had a philosophical bias against invisible substances. ID hasn't met that burden of proof.
And this philosophical battle, this is what the source identifies as leading to the fat end of the wedge, the real-world social and moral agenda.
Exactly. And we need to be clear, we're reporting here on the goals explicitly stated by ID leaders themselves as documented in the source material. The argument is, once you allow supernatural causation back into science, the thin end, the wedge widens. ID, by suggesting a non-natural origin for life or consciousness, opens the door to belief in a non-material soul.
And why is that strategically important for them?
Because, according to figures like Philip Johnson cited in the source, belief in a soul undermines purely materialistic explanations of human beings. It pushes back against scientific arguments that might challenge concepts like free will or personal responsibility.
And it connects directly to morality.
Directly. The argument follows. If humans are just a cosmic accident, products of blind evolution, then where do objective morals come from? ID proponents argue there can be no source of transcendent moral guidelines without God. So ID is presented as the necessary foundation for a God-given moral order.
And that has political implications.
Explicitly political goals. The source states that leaders in the movement aim to challenge and ultimately replace the democratic values stemming from the Enlightenment, things like individual liberty, tolerance, separation of church and state, with what they see as a superior, narrow, and restrictive Christian morality.
Influencing laws and policies.
Yes, aiming to reshape policy on issues like abortion, euthanasia, stem cell research, education, all based on the premise that humans possess a divinely created soul, not just an evolved biology.
But the source offers a naturalistic counter-explanation for morality, doesn't it? We don't need a supernatural source.
No. The counter-argument is that morality is essentially an evolved cultural device. We evolved biological capacities for empathy, sociality, cooperation because they helped our ancestors survive in groups. Morality laws, norms, ethics builds on that biological foundation.
It's a tool we developed.
A cultural tool that helps us manage social living, extend our natural sympathies beyond our immediate kin, and cooperate on larger scales. Our moral nature, including compassion and tolerance, can be understood as arising from our evolutionary and cultural history, not requiring intervention from outside the natural world. #outro.
So, wrapping this deep dive up, it seems the core scientific claims of intelligent design, irreducible complexity, specified complexity, they don't really hold up under scrutiny.
No. The source material argues quite strongly that they're either refuted by actual biological evidence like redundancy, robustness, the power of self-organization, the evidence for gradual evolution, or they simply represent a kind of, well, scientifically lazy and defeatist approach.
Giving up when there's a gap in knowledge and just saying, a designer must have done it.
Pretty much. It invokes a supernatural cause without providing positive evidence for it, essentially stopping the scientific inquiry rather than advancing it.
And ID fails that basic evidence test.
Fundamentally, it asks us to accept the existence of a designer whose nature, motives, methods, even origin are completely unknown and untestable. That's a stark contrast to evolutionary science, which proposes detailed, testable, falsifiable mechanisms. As the source puts it, the assertion of a designer remains evidentially ungrounded.
Which brings us back to that rather chilling final point raised in the source about the wedge strategy's ultimate aims. If, as ID proponents advocate, we're supposed to weaken the standards of rational, evidence-based inquiry.
Based on the notion that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, not superstition.
What are the potential consequences of deliberately crippling reason to make room for belief in the evidentially ungrounded supernatural?
Well, the source suggests the danger goes far beyond just hindering science or medicine. If objective evidence is devalued, if wisdom can be asserted without rational grounding, it potentially undermines the very basis for a tolerant democratic society.
How so?
Because it risks creating a space where pronouncements from self-appointed authorities, claiming divine insight perhaps, cannot be effectively challenged by reason, argument, or evidence. That erosion of shared standards of reason could have profound implications for the fundamental values, tolerance, freedom, compassion that shape how we want our society to function and develop in the future. It's a question not just about biology, but about the kind of society we want to build.